The thunder of hooves echoed across the dusty plains as Olivia Blackwell raced toward the horizon, the weight of his father's telegram still heavy in his pocket. "Defend the homestead at all costs," it had read. But Owen Blackwell hadn't expected to find a woman occupying his family's abandoned cabin when he finally arrived after 3 weeks of hard riding across the Montana Territory in the summer of 1876. The woman had copper hair that caught the fading sunlight and eyes the color of the stormy sky. She stood in the doorway of the small cabin, a shotgun held awkwardly in her trembling hands. Her dress was torn and dusty, and she looked as if she hadn't slept in days. "This is Blackwell property," Owen said, keeping his hands visible as he dismounted his exhausted horse. His tall frame cast a long shadow in the evening light, his weathered Stetson pulled low over his eyes. "I'm Owen Blackwell, and this is my family's homestead." "Violet Turner," she replied, her voice steadier than her hands, "and I've nowhere else to go." Owen approached cautiously, noting the determined set of her jaw despite the fear in her eyes. "That may be, Miss Turner, but this is still my family's land. Your family abandoned it," she countered. "I found it empty 3 weeks ago. The door was hanging off its hinges, and wolves had been inside." Owen sighed, running a hand over the stubble on his jaw. It was true. His father had moved the family to Colorado after the drought had devastated their cattle operation. Owen had stayed behind in Virginia City, working as a ranch hand until his father's telegram had arrived with news that gold had been discovered near their old property. Now, every prospector and claim jumper in the territory would be trying to stake a claim if word got out. "I need to water my horse," Owen said finally, "and then we can discuss your situation." Violet lowered the shotgun slightly but remained wary as Owen led his horse to the small creek that ran behind the cabin. He took his time, allowing her to gather her thoughts and perhaps her belongings. When he returned, she was still standing in the doorway, but the shotgun was propped against the wall inside. "I fixed the door," she said simply, "and patched the roof where it was leaking." Owen nodded, noting the improvements to the small cabin. It was true that the place looked better than when his family had left it. The small vegetable garden his mother had abandoned was now thriving, and smoke curled from the chimney, suggesting a cooking fire within. "Why are you here, Miss Turner? This is no place for a woman alone." Her chin lifted defiantly. "I had no choice. My father died in the mine collapse at Silver Peak. The company seized our home for debts, and her voice faltered momentarily. "I had nowhere to go." Owen removed his hat, running his fingers through his dark hair. "I'm sorry for your loss, truly." "But I can't. I can cook," she interrupted. "And I've made this place livable again. I can be useful while I save enough to move on." Owen hesitated. His father had sent him to secure the property and prepare it for their return, not to take in strays, especially not female ones with copper hair and eyes that reminded him of Montana skies before a storm. "It wouldn't be proper," he said finally. "A woman staying alone with a man she's not married to. I'll sleep in the lean-to out back," she offered quickly. "No one need know I'm here at all." The desperation in her voice stirred something in Owen. He'd seen enough of the world to know what happened to women without protection in the territories. The mining camps were especially cruel to those without means. "One night," he conceded. "You can stay one night, and in the morning I'll take you to town." The relief that washed over her face was quickly replaced with determination. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. You won't regret it." But as Owen entered the cabin that had once been his childhood home, he already suspected he might. The interior of the cabin had been transformed. What had been a hastily abandoned home was now clean and orderly. The rough-hewn table his father had built was scrubbed clean, and wildflowers sat in a cracked jar at its center. The hearth had been swept, and a stew bubbled in the iron pot hanging over the fire. "You've been busy," Owen observed, setting his saddlebags on the floor. "Idle hands invite the devil's work," Violet replied, moving to stir the stew. At least, that's what my father always said. Owen watched as she moved around the small space with an easy familiarity that made something twist in his chest. This had been his home once, and seeing someone else make it their own stirred, complicated feelings. How long were you planning to stay here? He asked, removing his dusty coat and hanging it on a peg by the door. Violet's shoulders tensed slightly. Until I had enough saved for passage to San Francisco. My aunt lives there. I've been selling eggs from the chickens I found in the coop and vegetables from the garden to travelers on the road. You restored the chicken coop too? Owen was impressed despite himself. It wasn't difficult. The hens had gone wild but were still around. It took some patience to gather them again. She gestured to the stew. Are you hungry? It's rabbit with some wild onions and potatoes from the garden. Owen's stomach growled in response. He hadn't eaten a proper meal since leaving Virginia City. That would be welcome, thank you. They ate in awkward silence, the only sounds the scrape of spoons against bowls and the occasional pop from the fire. Outside, the Montana night descended quickly, turning the windows into black mirrors that reflected their odd domestic tableau. Where will you go? Owen asked finally. When I take you to town tomorrow. Violet set down her spoon, her eyes fixed on the table. I don't know. The boarding house charges more than I can afford, and the only work for women in these parts is. She trailed off, her implication clear. Owen nodded grimly. The saloons and brothels were always hiring, and for a woman without family or means, options were limited. Perhaps I could speak to Mrs. Henderson at the general store, he offered. She sometimes needs help. I asked when I first arrived, Violet said quietly. Her niece from St. Louis had already taken the position. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken realities. Owen had seen many women forced into desperate circumstances after losing their male protectors. The West was unforgiving that way. Well, he said finally, we'll figure something out in the morning. Violet nodded, rising to collect their empty bowls. I'll wash these and then retire to the lean-to. No, Owen said firmly. You'll take the bed, I'll sleep by the fire. She looked ready to protest, but then seemed to think better of it. Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. Owen, he corrected. If we're sharing a roof, even for one night, you might as well use my given name. A small smile touched her lips. Owen, then, and you may call me Violet. As she prepared for bed, Owen settled himself near the hearth, using his saddle as a pillow. He watched the flames dance and tried not to think about the woman sleeping just a few feet away or the decision he would have to make in the morning. Sleep came fitfully to Owen that night. Every creak of the cabin, every whisper of wind outside, had him reaching for the Colt revolver beside him. It had been years since he'd slept under this roof, and the memories it held kept him hovering between wakefulness and uneasy dreams. Dawn arrived with the crow of a rooster, and Owen opened his eyes to find Violet already up, stoking the fire and preparing coffee in the battered pot his mother had left behind. You're an early riser, he observed, sitting up and running a hand through his hair. Farm habit, she replied, not turning from her task. My father believed the day was half-wasted if you weren't up before the sun. Owen watched as she moved efficiently around the small space. Her copper hair was tied back in a simple braid, and she wore the same worn dress as the day before, though she'd clearly made attempts to smooth its wrinkles. I should get ready for town, she said, her back still to him. I'll need to gather my things. Owen stood, stretching his stiff muscles. About that, he began, uncertain of how to proceed. The thought of delivering her to a town where she had no prospects didn't sit well with him. I've been thinking. Violet turned, her expression guarded. Yes, my father sent me here to prepare the homestead for his return. There's a lot of work to be done, repairs to the barn, planting to be started, fences to mend. He paused, measuring his words. It would go faster with help. Hope flickered across her face before she carefully masked it. Are you offering me employment, Mr. Blackwell? Owen, he reminded her. And yes, I suppose I am. Room and board, plus a small wage that you can save for your passage to San Francisco. In return, you help with the cooking and the garden and any other tasks that need doing around the place. That's very generous, she said cautiously. But what about the impropriety of our arrangement? You seemed concerned about that yesterday. Owen hadn't fully thought this through, and her question highlighted the complications. Unmarried men and women didn't simply live together in the territories, not if the woman wanted to maintain her reputation. We'll tell anyone who asks that you're my cousin, come to help after hearing of my father's plans to return, he suggested. That should satisfy most folks. Violet considered this, her fingers worrying the edge of her apron. And if it doesn't, then they can mind their own business, Owen said with more confidence than he felt. The truth was, he'd be bringing trouble on both of them if word got around that he was living alone with an unmarried woman who wasn't his kin. But the alternative, abandoning her to the limited mercies of the mining town, seemed worse. All right, she agreed finally. I accept your offer, with gratitude. The relief in her voice made Owen wonder just how desperate her situation had been. Good, then let's have that coffee and make a plan for the day's work. As they sat at the table, mapping out the tasks ahead, Owen couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just complicated his life immeasurably. But watching Violet's animation as she suggested improvements to the garden and repairs to the chicken coop, he found he didn't regret his decision. The following weeks fell into a rhythm neither of them had anticipated. Owen spent his days repairing the barn, reinforcing the cabin's foundation, and mending the fences that would eventually contain the cattle his father planned to bring. Violet tended the garden, expanding it considerably, and turned her attention to making the cabin more comfortable. They worked separately for the most part, coming together for meals and the occasional task that required two pairs of hands. Their conversations, initially stilted and formal, gradually eased into a comfortable exchange as they discovered shared interests and compatible temperaments. Owen found himself looking forward to the evenings when they would sit by the fire, Violet mending clothes or weaving baskets from reeds she collected at the creek, while he whittled or cleaned his guns. It was a domestic tranquility he hadn't experienced since before his mother died, and he was surprised by how much he enjoyed it. One evening, as they sat in companionable silence, Violet looked up from her work. "May I ask you something personal, Owen?" He nodded, curious. "Go ahead." "Why didn't you go with your family to Colorado? Why stay behind in Virginia City?" Owen's hands stilled on the piece of wood he was carving. It was a fair question, but one he rarely discussed. "I had a disagreement with my father about the future of the ranch. He wanted to sell everything and start fresh elsewhere. I believed we could make it work here, even after the drought. And he wouldn't listen. My father is a stubborn man," Owen said with a wry smile. "Once his mind is set, there's no changing it. We had words, harsh ones, and I told him I'd make my own way. But now you're back, doing his bidding," Violet observed softly. Owen's jaw tightened. "I'm securing my inheritance. This land will be mine someday, and I aim to make sure it's not lost to claim jumpers or squatters in the meantime." As soon as the words left his mouth, he regretted them. "I didn't mean that I'm a squatter," Violet finished for him, her voice even. "But that's exactly what I am, Owen. I took shelter in an abandoned home that wasn't mine. You needed a place to stay. That's different, is it?" She set aside her mending and met his gaze directly. "Your father abandoned this place, just as you said. I found it and made it livable again. In some ways, I have more claim to it than he does now." There was an edge to her voice that Owen hadn't heard before, a hint of the steel beneath her gentle exterior. He found himself admiring it even as her words challenged him. "The law says differently," he reminded her, but without heat. "The law," she echoed with a small, sad smile. "The law also said the mining company could take my home after my father died in their unsafe shaft, even though he'd paid for it twice over with his blood and sweat." Owen had no response to that. The injustices of the frontier were many, and the law often served those with power and money rather than those in need. "I'm sorry," he said finally, "for what happened to your father and for my careless words." Violet nodded, accepting his apology. "And I'm sorry for questioning your loyalty to your family. It's not my place." The moment stretched between them, tense with unspoken thoughts and feelings. Then Violet stood, gathering her mending. "It's getting late. I should retire." Owen watched her cross to the small alcove they'd created for her with hanging blankets at the far end of the cabin. They'd abandoned the pretense of her sleeping in the lean-to after the first week, when a spring storm had nearly blown the rickety structure away. Instead, they'd fashioned a separate sleeping area for her inside, maintaining a semblance of propriety while acknowledging the practical realities of their situation. "Good night, Violet," he called softly. "Good night, Owen," came her reply, and then the soft rustle of blankets as she settled in for the night. Owen remained by the fire, turning their conversation over in his mind. There was truth in what she'd said about his father abandoning the homestead. And perhaps there was truth, too, in his own conflicted feelings about returning at his father's command after their bitter parting. But there was another truth emerging, one he was reluctant to examine too closely. In the few weeks since Violet's arrival, the cabin had begun to feel like a home again, in a way it hadn't since his mother was alive. And that had little to do with the physical improvements she'd made, and everything to do with her presence. As spring deepened into early summer, the homestead flourished under their combined efforts. The garden yielded a bounty of vegetables. The chicken coop was now home to a dozen healthy hens, and Owen had successfully repaired the barn and corral in anticipation of the cattle his father would bring. Their trip to town for supplies became a monthly occurrence, and they maintained the fiction that Violet was Owen's cousin from back east. If the shopkeeper's wife or the blacksmith's daughter looked at them with knowing eyes, neither Owen nor Violet acknowledged it. It was during their third trip to town that trouble first found them. Owen was loading supplies into their wagon when he noticed a group of men watching Violet as she examined fabric at the general store. Something in their manner, the way they huddled together, speaking in low voices and casting glances her way, set his teeth on edge. "Finish up here," he told Violet quietly. "I think it's time we headed back." She looked up, noting the tension in his jaw. "Is something wrong?" "Just some men taking too much interest in our business," he replied, nodding discreetly toward the group. "Let's not give them reason to continue." Violet quickly made her selections, and they were nearly to the wagon when one of the men broke from the group and approached them. "Well now, if it ain't the squatter from Silver Peak," the man drawled, his voice carrying in the quiet street. "Thought you'd disappeared, Miss Turner, but here you are, playing house with Blackwell." Owen stepped between them, his hand hovering near his holstered revolver. "This is my cousin, mister. You're mistaken." The man laughed, a harsh sound that drew attention from passers-by. "Cousin, is it? That's not what folks are saying. Word is, you've got yourself a pretty little bedwarmer out at that homestead." Anger flared hot in Owen's chest, but he fought to keep his composure. Starting a fight in the middle of town would only confirm the rumors and potentially lead to more trouble. "I don't know what you've heard, but you'd be wise to watch your mouth," he warned, his voice low. "Now step aside." "We're leaving." The man's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Owen thought he might push the confrontation further. Then a voice called from the saloon across the street. "Daniels, your table's ready." A heavy-set man waved from the batwing doors. The man Daniels spat in the dirt near Owen's boots. "This ain't finished, Blackwell. A decent man would have sent her packing, not kept her for himself." He sauntered away, leaving Owen and Violet standing in uncomfortable silence as curious onlookers pretended not to stare. "Let's go," Owen said quietly, helping Violet into the wagon before climbing up beside her. They rode in silence for several miles, the tension between them palpable. Finally, Violet spoke. "Who was that man?" Owen's hands tightened on the reins. Joseph Daniels. He works for the Silver Peak Mining Company, or did, last I heard. Must have known your father. Violet nodded, her face pale. He came to our house after the accident. He was the one who told me we had to leave because of father's debts to the company store. Owen glanced at her, noting the way her hands twisted in her lap. Did he threaten you then? Not in words, she said softly, but the way he looked at me. He suggested there were arrangements that could be made if I was accommodating. The implication made Owen's blood boil. You should have told me. What would you have done? She asked. Started a fight in the middle of town, that would only have made things worse. She was right, of course. A public confrontation would have drawn unwanted attention and potentially legitimized the rumors already circulating about their living arrangement. We'll need to be more careful, he said instead. Perhaps it's best if you don't come to town for a while. Violet turned to him, eyes flashing. So I'm to be a prisoner at the homestead, hidden away because of what people might say? No, Owen said quickly. That's not what I meant. I just think, I know what you think, she interrupted. You think it would be easier if I wasn't around to complicate things. If you could just tell everyone I'd moved on. That's not fair, Violet. I'm trying to protect you. I don't need protection, she said fiercely. I need respect, the same respect you'd give any person working alongside you. Owen fell silent, surprised by her vehemence. He'd thought he was being considerate, but perhaps he'd been patronizing instead. You're right, he conceded after a moment. I apologize. What would you suggest we do? Violet seemed taken aback by his willingness to listen. I'm not sure, but hiding me away isn't the answer. That only gives credence to their assumptions. Owen nodded slowly. Then we continue as we have been. We work the homestead, we go to town when necessary, and we pay no mind to gossip. And if Daniels or others cause trouble, then we face it together, Owen said firmly. This is our home, and we have every right to live in it as we see fit. The words hung between them, significant in ways neither was ready to examine. Our home. It had slipped out unbidden, but Owen found he didn't want to take it back. Violet's expression softened, and she reached out to touch his arm briefly. Thank you, Owen. The simple contact sent warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with the summer sun overhead. Owen nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and turned his attention back to the road. As they continued toward the homestead, the confrontation in town receded, replaced by the comfortable silence they'd grown accustomed to. But Owen couldn't shake the memory of Daniel's words or the unsettling feeling that their peaceful existence was about to be challenged. The threat materialized sooner than either of them expected. 3 days after their encounter in town, Owen was repairing a section of fence when he heard the distant thunder of approaching horses. He straightened, shading his eyes against the midday sun, and counted 5 riders approaching from the east. His hand moved instinctively to the revolver at his hip as he recognized Joseph Daniels at the head of the group. Behind him were 4 men Owen didn't know, all heavily armed and riding with purpose. Violet, he called, turning toward the cabin where she was hanging laundry. Go inside. We have company. She looked up, following his gaze to the approaching riders. Her face paled, but she gathered the wet clothes quickly and disappeared into the cabin. Owen hoped she'd have the sense to take the shotgun from its place by the door. He positioned himself between the approaching riders and the cabin, his stance casual but alert as the men reined in their horses a few yards away. Blackwell, Daniels acknowledged with a nod that held no friendliness. We need to talk. You're trespassing on private property, Daniels, Owen replied evenly. State your business or be on your way. Daniels dismounted, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the ground. The other men remained on horseback, watching the exchange with predatory interest. Heard an interesting rumor, Daniels said, approaching slowly. Seems your father struck gold on this worthless patch of dirt. That why you came rushing back from Virginia City? Owen kept his expression neutral, though inwardly he cursed. His father's telegram had mentioned gold. but Owen had seen no evidence of it in his weeks of working the land. Still, rumors of gold were dangerous things in the territories, capable of inciting violence and drawing all manner of desperate men. "My father sent for me to prepare the homestead for his return," Owen said truthfully. "If he's found gold, it's news to me." Daniels laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Come now, Blackwell. We both know the drought drove your family off this land, then suddenly your father wants it back. The same time prospectors are finding color in the creek beds all through this valley. Quite the coincidence." "Think what you like," Owen replied. "But as I said, you're trespassing. I'll ask you once more to state your business and be on your way." Daniel's smile faded. "My business is with the woman you're keeping in that cabin. The mining company has unfinished business with Miss Turner regarding her father's debts." "Her father died working your unsafe mines," Owen said, anger creeping into his voice. "Whatever debts, he had died with him." "That's not how it works," Daniels countered. "The company's owed nearly $200. Until it's paid, they have a claim on any property or assets belonging to the Turner family." "She has no property. You saw to that when you drove her from her home." "She has herself," Daniels said, his meaning unmistakable. "Pretty young woman like that could work off the debt at the company boarding house. Plenty of lonely miners would pay good money for her. Companionship." The suggestion made Owen's hand tighten on his revolver. "Get off my land," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Daniels seemed unconcerned by the threat. "You're harboring a debtor, Blackwell. That makes you liable. Either send her out to settle accounts or we'll consider your protection of her as assuming the debt yourself." "I'll say it one more time," Owen replied, drawing his revolver in one fluid motion. "Get off my land." The men on horseback shifted, hands moving to their own weapons, but Daniels held up a hand to stay them. "No need for gunplay today," he said, though his eyes had hardened. "We'll go peacefully. But this isn't over, Blackwell. The company will have its due one way or another." He mounted his horse with deliberate slowness, then tipped his hat in mock politeness. "Give Miss Turner my regards. Tell her I'll be seeing her soon." The 5 men wheeled their horses and rode away, leaving a cloud of dust and an unspoken threat hanging in the air. Owen watched until they disappeared over the ridge, then holstered his revolver and headed for the cabin. Violet was waiting just inside the door, the shotgun clutched in her hands. "What did they want?" she asked, her voice steadier than Owen expected. "Daniels claims the mining company is still after you for your father's debts," he explained, taking the shotgun gently from her grip. "He suggested you could work it off at the company boarding house." Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed by a flash of fear quickly masked by anger. "The boarding house is little more than a brothel. My father owed them for supplies, not enough to justify such demands." "How much did he owe?" Owen asked. Violet shook her head. "Perhaps $50, for tools and blasting powder. Certainly not the 200 Daniels claimed." "They're inflating the debt to force you into an impossible situation," Owen said grimly. "It's a common tactic with the mining companies. What do we do?" Violet asked, her earlier bravado fading. Owen wished he had a simple answer. "For now, we stay alert. I don't think they'll return today, but we should be prepared in case they do. And tomorrow, the day after, we can't live under siege, Owen." She was right. They couldn't spend their days watching the horizon for riders, jumping at every sound. And with just the 2 of them, they couldn't maintain a constant watch. "I'll ride to the county seat tomorrow," he decided. "Speak to the sheriff, maybe consult a lawyer about these so-called debts. There must be legal protections against what they are trying to do." Violet nodded, though she didn't look convinced. "And if there aren't, the law hasn't been particularly kind to women without means or protection." Owen had no argument against that truth. The frontier justice system was often arbitrary at best, corrupt at worst. But they had to try something. "We'll find a way," he promised. "I won't let them take you, Violet." She looked up at him, searching his face for something reassurance, perhaps, or confirmation of his sincerity. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her, for she nodded once more. "Thank you," she said softly, "for standing with me against them." The gratitude in her voice made Owen uncomfortable. He wasn't doing anything extraordinary, just what any decent man would do. But as he looked at her standing in the cabin they'd come to share, he knew his motives weren't entirely selfless. The thought of Violet being taken away, of returning to the empty homestead without her presence, was more disturbing than he wanted to admit. "We should finish the day's chores," he said, changing the subject. "No sense letting Daniels and his threats disrupt our work." They returned to their tasks, but the easy rhythm of their days had been broken. As they worked, Owen found himself constantly scanning the horizon, listening for the approach of horses. And when darkness fell, he insisted on taking the first watch, despite Violet's protests. "You need rest as much as I do," she argued as he settled himself by the window, rifle across his lap. "I'll wake you for the second watch," he promised. "Now get some sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day." Reluctantly, she retreated to her alcove. Owen watched the night deepen outside the window, his thoughts churning with strategies and contingencies. The mining company was powerful, with men and resources at its disposal. If they were determined to collect on this alleged debt, they wouldn't be easily deterred. The most straightforward solution would be to pay the debt, but $200 was a fortune in the territories. Owen had perhaps $50 to his name, certainly not enough to satisfy Daniels and his employers. As the night wore on, another possibility took shape in his mind. It was unorthodox, perhaps even foolhardy, but it might offer Violet the protection she needed. The question was whether she would agree to it, and whether Owen himself was ready for such a step. By dawn, he had made his decision. When Violet emerged from her alcove, he was still at the window, his expression determined. "You never woke me for my watch," she chided, moving to stoke the fire. "I had thinking to do," he replied, setting aside the rifle and standing to stretch his stiff muscles. "About our situation." Something in his tone made her turn to face him. "And have you reached any conclusions?" "I have," Owen said, meeting her gaze directly. "I think you should marry me." The words hung in the air between them, startling in their plainness. Violet stared at him, her expression shifting from surprise to confusion to wariness. "Marry you?" she repeated. "Owen, why would you suggest such a thing?" "It's practical," he said, though even as the words left his mouth, he knew they weren't entirely true. "As my wife, you'd be under my legal protection. The mining company couldn't touch you or make claims on your father's debts." "Marriage isn't something to enter into merely for practical reasons," Violet protested. "It's a sacred commitment." "I know that," Owen said, stepping closer to her. "And I wouldn't suggest it if I didn't believe we could make a true marriage of it in time." Color rose in Violet's cheeks. "In time, Owen, we barely know each other." "We've lived together for nearly 2 months," he pointed out. "We work well together, we enjoy each other's company. Many marriages start with less." She turned away, her hands busy with the coffee pot. "And what of your father? Would he approve of you marrying a penniless woman with no family or connections?" It was a fair question, and one Owen had considered during his night watch. "My father sent me here to secure the homestead. Having a wife to help run, it would only strengthen our claim to the land." "So I would be useful," Violet said, a hint of bitterness in her voice. "First as a housekeeper, now as a wife to legitimate your family's claim." Owen stepped forward, gently turning her to face him. "That's not what I meant, and I think you know it." Their eyes met, and in that moment, the pretense between them began to crumble. Owen had been fighting his growing feelings for Violet since her arrival, telling himself it was merely gratitude for her help or appreciation for her companionship. But standing here now, with the morning light spilling through the window and illuminating her copper hair, he could no longer deny the truth. "I care for you, Violet," he said softly. "More than I expected to, more than might be wise, given our circumstances. But I believe we could build a good life together, if you're willing to try." Vulnerability showed in her eyes, mixed with a tentative hope that made his heart beat faster. And if I'm not, if I say no, then I'll still stand with you against Daniels and the mining company, Owen assured her. I'll still help you save for your passage to San Francisco. Nothing changes in that regard. Violet studied his face, searching for deception or ulterior motives. Finding none, she asked, "May I have time to consider your proposal? It's rather sudden." "Of course," Owen said, stepping back to give her space. "Take all the time you need." But time was a luxury they didn't have. As the morning progressed, they worked in awkward silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Owen was checking the chicken coop when he heard the now familiar sound of approaching horses. This time, it wasn't Daniels and his men. Instead, a group of townsfolk rode into the yard, led by the mayor of the nearby settlement. Behind him were several prominent citizens, including the minister and the owner of the general store. Owen set down his tools and walked to meet them, puzzled by their unexpected visit. "Mayor Thompson," he greeted the lead rider, "this is a surprise." The mayor, a portly man with a carefully trimmed beard, dismounted with effort. "Blackwell," he acknowledged, his expression grave, "we've come on a matter of some delicacy." The other men dismounted as well, forming a semicircle around Owen. He noted that several wore expressions of disapproval, while others seemed merely uncomfortable. "What matter would that be?" Owen asked, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew. "It concerns the young woman living here," the mayor said, confirming Owen's suspicions. "Miss Turner, I believe her name is." At that moment, Violet emerged from the cabin, drawn by the voices in the yard. She froze momentarily at the sight of the gathered men, then straightened her shoulders and walked forward to stand beside Owen. "I'm Violet Turner," she said, her voice steady despite the nervous glance she cast at Owen. "What business do you have with me?" The mayor cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable addressing her directly. "Miss Turner, it has come to the attention of the town council that you've been residing here with Mr. Blackwell for some time now, without the benefit of marriage or family relation." "I don't see how that's the town council's concern," Owen interjected, his voice hard. "This is private property, and what happens here is our business alone." "Ordinarily, I would agree," the mayor replied. "But when matters of public morality are at stake, the council has a duty to intervene." "Public morality," Violet repeated, color rising in her cheeks. "We've done nothing immoral." "The appearance of impropriety is sometimes as damaging as impropriety itself," the minister spoke up, his tone sanctimonious. "A young, unmarried woman living alone with a bachelor, it sets a poor example for the community." Owen fought to control his temper. "Miss Turner is my employee. She helps maintain the homestead in preparation for my family's return. There's nothing improper about our arrangement." "That's not what we've heard," the general store owner said, his eyes narrowed. "Word is, she's been sharing your cabin all these weeks." No decent woman would agree to such an arrangement unless. He left the implication hanging, but his meaning was clear. Violet's face flushed with anger and humiliation. "Unless what, Mr. Peterson?" she challenged. "Unless I were a woman of loose morals, is that what you're suggesting?" The man had the grace to look away, but the damage was done. The gathered men shifted uncomfortably, some avoiding her gaze while others stared with open judgment. "We're not here to make accusations," the mayor said hastily, "but to resolve a situation that has caused concern in the community." "And how do you propose to resolve it?" Owen asked, his hand instinctively moving to rest on Violet's back in a gesture of support. The mayor straightened, assuming an official air. "The council has determined that Miss Turner must leave the homestead immediately. We've arranged for lodging at Widow Harmon's boarding house in town, where she can stay until more permanent arrangements can be made." "And if I refuse?" Violet asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then the council will have no choice but to notify the territorial authorities," the minister replied. "Cohabitation outside of marriage is still illegal in the territory, Miss Turner. You could face charges, as could Mr. Blackwell." Owen had heard enough. "You come onto my land. insult a lady under my protection, and then threaten us with legal action. You overstep yourselves, gentlemen. We're trying to do what's best for all concerned, the mayor insisted, including Miss Turner. A woman alone in these parts needs the protection of society and its institutions. She has my protection, Owen stated firmly, and I won't allow you to force her from her home based on gossip and false assumptions. The men exchanged glances, clearly not having expected such resistance. The mayor cleared his throat again. Mr. Blackwell, be reasonable. The young lady's reputation is at stake. If she remains here, she'll be ruined in the eyes of society. No decent man would ever offer marriage to a woman who had lived unchaperoned with another man. That's a risk I'm willing to take, Violet said, finding her voice. She stood straighter, her eyes flashing with defiance. This is my home now, and I won't be driven from it by small-minded gossip. The mayor's face hardened. I'm afraid we must insist, Miss Turner. For your own good, as well as the moral welfare of the community. She's not going anywhere, Owen said, his voice quiet but firm. He moved to stand in the doorway of the cabin, physically blocking the entrance. This is Blackwell property, and Miss Turner stays here with my full permission and protection. Blackwell, see reason, the minister urged. The girl must go. Her presence here is a moral stain on the community and a corruption of decent values. Owen looked at the men gathered before him, men he'd known, traded with, occasionally shared a drink with in town. Men who now stood in judgment of a woman they barely knew, based on nothing more than rumors and narrow-minded conventions. No, he said simply. The silence that followed was profound. The mayor's face reddened with anger and embarrassment. I beg your pardon, I said no, Owen repeated, his voice gaining strength. Miss Turner stays. And if any of you set foot on this property again with the intention of removing her against her will, you'll be met with force. The threat hung in the air, unmistakable in its clarity. Several of the men shifted nervously, hands moving instinctively toward weapons before thinking better of it. This is outrageous, the minister sputtered. You would defy the moral authority of the community for the sake of what's right, Owen finished for him. For the sake of a woman who has worked hard and caused harm to no one, yet finds herself persecuted by the very people who should offer her Christian charity. The rebuke struck home. Several of the men looked away, unable to meet Owen's steady gaze or Violet's dignified silence. You leave us no choice but to take this matter to the territorial authorities, the mayor said finally. They may take a different view of your defiance. Do what you must, Owen replied. But until they arrive with a legal warrant, Miss Turner remains here under my protection. The standoff continued for several tense moments before the mayor finally nodded curtly. Very well. But this isn't the end of the matter, Blackwell. The council will not stand for such flagrant disregard of community standards. I believe our business is concluded, Owen said, not bothering to hide his contempt. Good day, gentlemen. The men mounted their horses, some muttering under their breath, others casting dark looks at the cabin and its inhabitants. As they rode away, Owen remained in the doorway, watching until they disappeared from sight. Only then did he turn to Violet, who stood pale but composed beside him. Are you all right? He asked softly. She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. I never expected to be spoken of as if I were some fallen woman. They had no right, Owen said, anger still evident in his voice. No right to judge you or demand you leave your home. Our home, she corrected quietly, meeting his eyes. And yes, Owen, I will marry you. The words took him by surprise, coming so suddenly after the confrontation. Violet, you don't have to decide now, not because of what just happened. I want you to be certain. I am certain, she said, her voice steadier now. Not because of their threats or judgments, but because I've come to care for you too. Because I believe, as you do, that we could build a good life together. Owen searched her face, finding sincerity in her eyes that matched the pounding of his own heart. Slowly, he reached for her hand, marveling at how small it felt in his own. "Then we'll be married," he said simply. "As soon as can be arranged." Violet's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "It won't be easy. The town will talk. Your father may not approve." "Let them talk," Owen said, returning her smile. "And my father will come around once he meets you. He respects determination and hard work above all else." As they stood together in the doorway of the cabin, they'd shared, the future stretching before them uncertain but full of possibility. Owen felt a peace he hadn't known since leaving this land years before. Whatever challenges came next from Daniels, from the town council, from his own family, they would face them together. The wedding took place 3 days later, not in the town church where they would have faced whispers and judgmental stares, but on the homestead itself. The ceremony was simple, performed by a circuit judge who happened to be passing through the area and who agreed to officiate when Owen rode out to meet him on the main road. Their only witnesses were an elderly couple who lived on a neighboring homestead 5 miles away, people who had known Owen's family for years and who welcomed Violet with genuine warmth. The woman brought a small cake she'd baked for the occasion, and her husband played a fiddle for their first dance as husband and wife. As the afternoon light turned golden across the land that was now truly theirs to share, Owen and Violet stood on the porch of their cabin, watching their guests depart. "Mrs. Blackwell," Owen said, testing the sound of it. "How does it feel?" Violet leaned against him, her copper hair loose around her shoulders as she'd worn it for the ceremony. "Strange, wonderful, a bit frightening." "Frightening?" Owen looked down at her with concern. "Everything has happened so quickly," she explained. 2 months ago, I was alone and desperate with no home and no future. Now I'm a married woman with a husband and a homestead. "Do you regret it?" he asked, suddenly uncertain. Violet shook her head, smiling up at him. "Not for a moment, but it's a lot to take in." Owen understood. Their courtship had been unconventional by any standard, compressed by circumstances and external pressures. But he felt in his heart that they had made the right choice, that what had begun as an arrangement of convenience had grown into something genuine and lasting. "We have time now," he said, putting his arm around her shoulders. "Time to build our life together without rushing." The peace of the moment was broken by the distant sound of horses' multiple riders approaching at speed. Owen tensed, immediately alert. "Go inside," he told Violet, reaching for the rifle that stood propped against the wall. "No," she said firmly. "We face this together, whatever it is." Before Owen could argue, the riders came into view, 5 men as before, but this time led not by Joseph Daniels, but by a man Owen recognized with a jolt of surprise. "Father," he breathed, lowering the rifle slightly. "Oliver Blackwell, SR." Reined in his horse at the edge of the yard, his weathered face unreadable as he surveyed the homestead and the couple standing on the porch. Behind him rode Owen's younger brother, William, and 3 men Owen didn't recognize, likely hired hands from the new ranch in Colorado. "Son," the elder Blackwell acknowledged with a curt nod. His gaze shifted to Violet, taking in her fancy dress and the flowers in her hair. "I see we've arrived at an inopportune moment." "You've arrived on my wedding day," Owen confirmed, setting aside the rifle and moving down the porch steps. Violet followed, her hand slipping into his. "Father, this is Violet Turner Blackwell, my wife." The older man's eyebrows rose, but he dismounted with the fluid grace of a lifetime horseman and removed his hat. "Mrs. Blackwell," he said, inclining his head in a gesture that wasn't quite respectful but not openly hostile either. "This is unexpected news." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Blackwell," Violet replied, her voice steady despite the tension evident in her posture. "Owen has told me much about you." "Has he now?" Oliver SR glanced at his son, a hint of skepticism in his expression. "Interesting, as he hasn't seen fit to inform me of such a significant development in his life." "There hasn't been time," Owen said, bristling at the implied criticism. Your telegram said only to secure the homestead. It didn't invite a correspondence about my personal affairs. The elder Blackwell's mouth tightened, but he didn't pursue the argument. Instead, he gestured to the men behind him. William, you remember. And these are our new hands, Peterson, Miller, and Donovan. Owen nodded to his brother, who returned the greeting with a small smile and acknowledged the other men with a brief wave. You're welcome to water your horses at the creek and rest a while. There's coffee inside and some cake left from the celebration. Generous of you, his father said, with just enough edge to his voice to make it clear he considered it his property, not Owen's to offer hospitality on. William, see to the horses. The rest of you set up camp by the barn. I need to speak with my son. Privately. The men dismounted and led their horses away, William casting a curious glance at Violet before following. Owen squeezed Violet's hand reassuringly. Why don't you go inside and prepare some coffee? He suggested. I won't be long. Violet hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave him alone with his father after the tense greeting. But she nodded, understanding the need for them to speak privately. It was an honor to meet you, Mr. Blackwell, she said to the older man. I hope we'll have the chance to become better acquainted during your stay. Oliver S.R. watched her go, his expression thoughtful. Only when the cabin door closed behind her did he turn back to his son. Married, he said flatly. To a woman I've never met, without so much as a letter of introduction or a request for blessing. Care to explain yourself, boy? Owen bridled at being addressed as boy at 30 years of age, but he kept his temper in check. It's a long story, father. One I'd be happy to share, but not if you're going to stand in judgment before hearing it. The older man's eyes narrowed. Don't take that tone with me. I sent you here to secure our property, not to find yourself a bride. I've done both, Owen replied evenly. The homestead is in better condition now than when we left it. The barn is repaired, the fences mended, the garden thriving. And yes, I've married a good woman who's helped make all that possible. And who is she? His father demanded. Where does she come from? What family? Her father was a miner at Silver Peak. He died in a shaft collapse earlier this year. The company took their home for alleged debts. Owen watched his father's face, knowing the older man's opinions about the mining companies and their practices. She was alone, with nowhere to go. So you married her out of pity? The scorn in his father's voice made Owen's hands clench. I married her because I love her, he said, the words coming easily now that they were spoken aloud. Because she's strong and determined and makes this place feel like a home again. Because when the town council came to drive her away, I couldn't imagine my life without her. Oliver S.R. blinked, surprised by the vehemence in his son's voice. The town council? What business did they have here? Owen hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. They objected to our living arrangement before we were married. There was also trouble with the mining company. They're still pursuing her for her father's debts. Understanding dawned in the older man's eyes. So you married her to protect her from these vultures. That was part of it, Owen admitted, but not all, not even the most important part. His father studied him for a long moment, then sighed heavily. You always were headstrong, just like your mother. There was a softening in his voice at the mention of his late wife. She'd have liked this girl of yours, I suspect. Never could resist a stray in need. It was as close to acceptance as Owen was likely to get, at least for now. Violet's not a stray, father. She's my wife and the future of this homestead. I'd appreciate it if you'd treat her with the respect she deserves. Oliver S.R. nodded slowly. Fair enough. I'll reserve judgment until I've had time to know her better. He glanced toward the cabin. Now, I believe you mentioned coffee and cake. It's been a long ride from Colorado. As they walked toward the cabin together, Owen felt a cautious optimism. His father was a hard man but a fair one. Given time, he would see Violet's worth, just as Owen had. Inside, they found Violet had not only set out coffee and the remaining wedding cake, but had also started preparations for a substantial meal. William and the ranch hands had been invited in, and were seated around the table, already engaged in conversation with the new Mrs. Blackwell. And then the calf just walked right into the house, mud and all, like it owned the place. William was saying, his usual reserve forgotten as Violet laughed at his story. She looked up as Owen and his father entered, her smile warm but her eyes questioning. Owen gave her a slight nod of reassurance as he moved to stand beside her. "Father, would you like to sit?" he offered, gesturing to the head of the table where Violet had set a place. Oliver S.R. paused, his gaze moving from the carefully arranged table to the woman who had created this welcome. Something in his expression shifted not quite approval, but perhaps a willingness to reconsider his initial judgment. "Thank you, Mrs. Blackwell," he said, taking the offered seat. "Your hospitality is appreciated. Please call me Violet," she replied, pouring coffee into his cup. "After all, we're family now." The evening progressed more smoothly than Owen had dared hope. His father, while not effusive, was polite to Violet and seemed genuinely interested in the improvements they'd made to the homestead. William, always more easygoing than either his father or brother, took to Violet immediately, appreciating her quick wit and practical nature. It was only after the meal, when the ranch hands had retired to their camp by the barn, and William had gone to check on the horses one last time, that Oliver S.R. broached the subject that had brought him to Montana. "I suppose you're wondering why we've come ahead of schedule," he said, accepting the whiskey Owen poured from a bottle they'd been saving for a special occasion. "The thought had crossed my mind," Owen admitted, sitting beside Violet on the bench across from his father. "Your telegram said to expect you in the fall after the cattle drive." The older man took a sip of his whiskey, his expression turning grave. "There's been trouble in Colorado, drought again, worse than here. The new ranch isn't going to work out." "I'm sorry to hear that," Owen said, genuinely sympathetic despite their differences. He knew how much his father had invested both financially and emotionally in the Colorado property. "It was a mistake to leave Montana," Oliver S.R. acknowledged, the admission clearly difficult for him. "Your mother always said this land was special, that it would sustain us if we were patient and worked with it instead of against it." He shook his head. "I should have listened to her, to you." The unexpected acknowledgement left Owen momentarily speechless. His father had never been one to admit errors in judgment, especially not to his children. "What will you do now?" Violet asked, filling the silence. "Return here permanently," Oliver S.R. nodded. "That's the plan. We've sold what we could in Colorado and brought the best of the breeding stock with us. They're being driven up by the rest of the hands, should arrive in about a week." He looked directly at Owen. "I was hoping you'd be willing to partner with me, make this a true family operation again." The offer was everything Owen had wanted when his father had first announced the move to Colorado, recognition of his value to the ranch, a place as an equal rather than just a son following orders. But circumstances had changed. "What about Violet?" he asked. "Where does she fit into this family operation?" His father glanced at the woman in question, who sat straight-backed and attentive beside Owen. "That would depend on her skills and interests, I suppose. Your mother handled the accounts and correspondence, raised the kitchen garden, and helped with calving season. There's always work for willing hands on a ranch." "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Blackwell," Violet said. "I've been helping Owen with everything from mending fences to preserving food. I'm a quick learner and would be happy to take on whatever responsibilities you think appropriate." Oliver S.R. studied her for a moment, then nodded, seemingly satisfied with her response. "We'll figure it out as we go then. The important thing is that we're all pulling in the same direction." He finished his whiskey and set down the glass. "Now, if you'll excuse me, it's been a long day. I'll bed down with the men in the barn tonight, give you newlyweds your privacy." After his father had gone, Owen and Violet sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the unexpected developments of the day. "How do you feel about all this?" Violet asked finally. Working with your father again after everything that happened between you? Owen considered the question. Honestly, I'm not sure. Part of me is glad he's recognizing what I've always known, that this land is worth fighting for. Another part is wary of falling back into old patterns where he gives orders and expects unquestioning obedience. You're not the same man who left for Virginia City, Violet pointed out. You've proven you can manage on your own. He'll have to respect that. And you? Owen asked, taking her hand. This wasn't what you signed up for, a house full of Blackwell men and a working cattle ranch. Violet smiled, squeezing his hand. I signed up for a life with you, Owen. The rest are just details we'll figure out together. Her smile turned impish. Besides, I rather like your brother, and your father. Well, I think there's more to him than first appears. Owen laughed, pulling her close. You're an optimist, Mrs. Blackwell. Someone in this family has to be, she replied, resting her head against his shoulder. As they sat together in the cabin that had become their home, Owen felt a sense of possibility that extended beyond the next day or week. For the first time, he could envision a future here, not just surviving, but thriving. Building something that would last. The next morning brought a return to reality in the form of hoofbeats approaching the homestead. Owen, who had risen early to help his father and brother plan the expanded operation, recognized the sound immediately and tensed. Expecting company? Oliver S.R. asked, noting his son's reaction. Not the welcome kind, Owen replied grimly. It's likely Joseph Daniels and his men from the mining company. They've been causing trouble over Violet's father's alleged debts. His father's expression hardened. Mining company thugs on my land. Not today, they aren't. He reached for the rifle propped against the porch railing. William, get the hands. Looks like we're going to have ourselves a conversation about boundaries. By the time Daniels and his men rode into the yard, they were met not by Owen alone, but by the full complement of Blackwell men. Owen, his father, William, and the 3 ranch hands, all armed and standing in a determined line before the cabin. Daniels reined in his horse, surprise evident on his face as he took in the unexpected show of force. Blackwell, he acknowledged Owen warily. I see you've acquired some help. My family, Owen corrected him, who are less than pleased to find mining company men trespassing on Blackwell land. Oliver S.R. stepped forward, his rifle held casually but visibly at the ready. I'm Oliver Blackwell. This is my property and you're not welcome on it. State your business and then leave. Daniels straightened in his saddle, attempting to reassert his authority. Our business is with the Turner woman regarding her father's debts to Silver Peak Mining Company. It's a legal matter that doesn't concern you, old man. The elder Blackwell's eyes narrowed dangerously. That Turner woman is now my daughter-in-law, which makes her business very much my concern. As for your legal matter, I find it interesting that you're pursuing it with armed men rather than through the courts. We've tried the reasonable approach, Daniels said, his gaze shifting to the cabin door where Violet now stood watching the confrontation. She's refused to acknowledge the debt or make arrangements to settle it. Because it's a fabrication, Violet called out, her voice strong despite the fear Owen could see in her eyes. My father owed a fraction of what you claim, and even that was paid twice over in blood when your unsafe mine collapsed on him. Daniel's face darkened with anger. Watch your tongue, woman. The company has documented every penny of Alexander Turner's debt, and as his only heir, you're legally obligated to settle it. Documented where? Oliver S.R. challenged. Have you brought these documents with you? Have they been reviewed by a judge? Or are you simply making demands based on the company's word alone? The questions hit their mark. Daniels shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. The company's records are kept at the main office in Silver Peak. The territorial judge has upheld similar claims in the past. Then take it to the judge, Owen suggested coldly. If you have a legitimate claim, pursue it through legal channels. But until you return with a court order signed by a territorial judge, you're trespassing on private property. "And we don't take kindly to trespassers," William added, his young face set in an uncharacteristically hard expression. Daniels looked from one Blackwell to another, clearly recalculating his odds. What had seemed a simple matter of intimidating a lone woman and a single homesteader had become considerably more complicated with the arrival of reinforcements. "This isn't over," he said finally, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "The company won't forget this interference." "Neither will we," Oliver S.R. replied evenly. "Now get off my land before I decide you're not just trespassing but threatening my family. That would give me certain rights under territorial law that you might not enjoy experiencing firsthand." The threat hung in the air, unmistakable in its clarity. After a tense moment, Daniels nodded curtly to his men, and they wheeled their horses around, riding away without another word. The Blackwells watched them go, maintaining their defensive line until the riders disappeared from view. Only then did Oliver S.R. lower his rifle, turning to look at his new daughter-in-law with newfound respect. "Seems you've brought some excitement to the family, Mrs. Blackwell," he observed, a hint of dry humor in his voice. "Care to tell me the full story of this mining company business over breakfast? I find I've worked up quite an appetite." As they gathered around the table, Violet recounted the complete history of her father's employment with Silver Peak Mining, his death in the collapse, and the company's subsequent actions to seize their home and pursue her for inflated debts. Owen watched his father's face as she spoke, recognizing the growing anger in the older man's eyes, anger not at Violet, but at the injustice she had endured. "It's a common enough tactic," Oliver S.R. said when she had finished. "The companies keep their workers in perpetual debt through the company store, then use those debts to control them and their families. When a man dies, they seize whatever assets remain and often try to force surviving family members, especially young women, into situations of dependence or worse." "That's what I feared," Violet admitted. "After they took our home, Mr. Daniels made it clear what kind of work would be available to me to settle the debt." Owen's hand tightened around hers beneath the table, while his father's expression darkened further. "We'll put a stop to this," the elder Blackwell declared. "I have some influence with Judge Patterson in Helena. He's no friend to the mining companies and has ruled against them in similar cases. We'll take this matter to him directly, with documentation of your father's actual expenses at the company store, if you have any records." "I have his pay ledger," Violet said, hope kindling in her eyes. "He kept meticulous records of every purchase and payment." "Good man," Oliver S.R. approved. "That will help our case considerably. William and I will ride to Helena tomorrow. The judge should be on his circuit court rotation there this week." Owen looked at his father with newfound appreciation. The man who had left Montana bitter and defeated was gone, replaced by the strong, decisive figure he remembered from his childhood, the man who had built the Blackwell ranch from nothing and defended it against all challenges. "Thank you, Father," he said simply. Oliver S.R. waved away the gratitude. "She's family now, and Blackwells protect their own." He turned his attention to the breakfast before him. "Now, let's discuss more pleasant matters. We have a ranch to rebuild." Over the next week, the homestead transformed into a hive of activity. The barn was expanded to accommodate the additional horses and the cattle that would soon arrive. New corrals were constructed, fences reinforced, and grazing areas assessed. Oliver S.R. had brought seed for hayfields and plans for irrigation improvements that would help them weather future droughts. Throughout it all, Violet worked alongside the men, proving her worth daily. She took charge of provisioning the expanded household, transformed the garden to feed more mouths, and kept the accounts with a precision that impressed even Oliver S.R., who had always handled that task himself after his wife's death. William and Oliver S.R. returned from Helena with welcome news. Judge Patterson had reviewed Alexander Turner's ledger and found the mining company's claims grossly inflated. He had issued an injunction against further collection attempts and promised to review the case formally at the next circuit court session. "It's not a final victory," Oliver S.R. cautioned when he delivered the news. "But it buys us time and puts the company on notice that their tactics won't go unchallenged." Violet, who had been hanging laundry when they rode in, nearly collapsed with relief. Owen was at her side instantly, supporting her as the tension she'd carried for months finally began to ease. "I never thought. I'd given up hope of justice," she admitted, tears welling in her eyes. "The judge was particularly interested in hearing about Daniel's suggestions regarding how you might work off the debt," William added, his young face flushed with indignation. "He said such coercion might constitute criminal behavior under territorial statutes." Oliver S.R. nodded grimly. "Daniels may find himself explaining his actions to more than just a civil judge if Patterson decides to pursue that angle. The prospect of justice, not just protection, but actual redress for the wrongs done to her family, seemed to transform Violet. She moved with new confidence, laughed more freely, and began to speak of the future not as something to endure, but as something to build. And build they did. The cattle arrived as promised, a small but high-quality herd that would form the foundation of the restored Blackwell Ranch. The men constructed additional outbuildings, while Violet, with Owen's help, expanded the main cabin to better accommodate the growing family. By the time autumn painted the surrounding hills in gold and crimson, the homestead had become a proper ranch again. The harvest was stored, the cattle settled in their winter pastures, and the family gathered each evening around the enlarged table in the cabin that now boasted a new bedroom for Owen and Violet, and improved living quarters for the others. On a crisp October evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Oliver S.R. cleared his throat in the way that signaled he had something important to say. "I've been thinking," he began, looking at Owen and Violet. "This cabin has served us well, but with winter coming and the family growing, we might consider building a proper house come spring." Owen glanced at his wife, who sat beside him darning socks. "What did you have in mind, Father?" "Something bigger. 2 stories with room for expansion." The older man's eyes twinkled as they rested briefly on Violet's midsection, where the first slight curve of pregnancy was just becoming visible. "Your mother always wanted a house with a proper parlor and enough bedrooms for grandchildren. Seems a fitting time to fulfill that wish." Violet blushed but smiled, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. They had shared the news with the family just the week before, to general celebration and William's teasing about working fast. "I think that's a wonderful idea," she said warmly. "This land deserves a home that will last for generations." Oliver S.R. nodded, satisfied. "Then it's settled. We'll draw up plans this winter and break ground as soon as the frost leaves the ground." He looked around at his expanded family, Owen and Violet, William, even the ranch hands who had become like extended family over the months of working together. "This is what I always wanted for the Blackwell land, not just survival, but a true legacy." As the evening wound down and the family retired to their respective quarters, Owen and Violet lingered by the fire, enjoying a rare moment alone. "Happy?" Owen asked, his arm around her shoulders as she leaned against him. Violet nodded, her copper hair gleaming in the firelight. "More than I ever thought possible. Sometimes I wonder if I'm dreaming if I'll wake up back in that mining camp, alone and afraid." "Not a dream," Owen assured her, his hand covering hers where it rested on her growing belly. "Though I sometimes wonder the same. If I hadn't returned when I did, if you hadn't found your way here. Then someone else would have stood in this doorway," she finished for him, turning to face him. "And when they told that person to send me away, perhaps they would have." Owen shook his head, drawing her closer. "No. It had to be us. This place, this moment, as if it were always meant to be." As they stood together in the doorway of the cabin that had brought them together, the doorway, where Owen had once stood firm against those who would have separated them, they looked out at the land that stretched before them. silvered by moonlight and full of promise. The threats that had once seemed so immediate, the mining company, the town council, even the initial disapproval of Owen's father, had been overcome through determination, justice, and the strength they found in each other. What remained was the future they would build together, not just for themselves but for the child who would carry their legacy forward. It was always meant to be, Violet agreed softly, reaching up to touch his face. This land, this life, us. Owen kissed her then, beneath the stars that had witnessed their unlikely beginning and now blessed their certain future. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them as they had faced all others together, standing firm in the doorway of the home they had created, refusing to be separated by any force, human or natural, that might try to come between them. For when they had told the cowboy to send her away, he had just stood in the doorway and said, "No." And in that simple refusal, a love story for the ages had begun.